Everything we do when we're writing code maps to some concept or we're just accessing elements of things. So it's really important to have a good foundation of how files work, how the file system works in whatever operating system you're in. So before we get into writing code, we're gonna go over a bunch of important things that you should know. And I had to figure out all these things the hard way. They're usually not in tutorials. The first thing that I want to show you is that a file has hidden characters in it. So if you look right here, there's a CRLF. What does that mean? That means carriage return and line feed. Now this is represented in the code as /n or escape character n. So what is character return? What is line feed? This goes back to the old typewriter days, and basically that was how it worked. You would have the slider at the top, boom, carriage return, and then line feed. That would be what you would do to go to the next line to start typing again. Now, there are other hidden characters that you're not going to see in a normal text, so it's important to look for these if you're running into weird problems with files. Whenever you're dealing with files, it assumes that the file is in the directory that you're actually working in unless you give it a path. So in this case, I'm in the Python tutorial directory, and I have this original.txt, and we have this file right here, filecopy.py, and that's what we're going to be working in. So if I just reference original.txt directly, it's going to assume that it's in the same place. Now, directories and folders are essentially the same thing. It's just called something different between things. Now in Windows, you can click up here and it'll give you, this is called the crumb bar, and it'll give you the full path to something. So see how this says C Python tutorial. So the full path would be C:/Python tutorial / and then the file name. However, slashes like this also, remember how I said /n? You can get into trouble with this. Let's look at an example here. If I go to my C drive, and then I have a folder in here called n-example. Now let me show you what would happen in Python really quick. If we have file path and we do C:/n example, and we print file path, what we're gonna get is C and then example. See how the N wasn't actually there? That's because see how it changed the color here? It sees that as the new line character, which is carriage return line feed that I just talked about a second ago. So if you're dealing with a full path, what you need to do is add in a second slash. And what that's going to do is say, okay, I'm about to get a special character, and then this is the special character. So it knows that these two combined equals a slash. Otherwise, it's like, okay, I'm expecting the special character. Okay, there is an N. All right, this combination together between the slash and the N makes a new line character. One other important thing to know, each folder or directory has certain permissions on it, and each individual file has permissions on it. And you can only access things that you have the appropriate permission level for. So for instance, if you wanted to write to a file and you don't have access to that directory at all, or write access to that directory, you can't create a new file in there or write to it. Now, I've seen this come up several times, especially when I'm dealing with network drives, where someone will be like, all right, we're going to get a new network drive and just move all these files over to a location. And then they don't give appropriate permissions to access the files. So you change it in the code, but the program can't actually access it. Now I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about files in general. We're going to focus on read first, then we're going to go into the other functions like write, append, and give you examples of that. And then we're going to finish by solving our problem. So let's talk about files in general. How do you open up a file? So you use this thing called open, and you can scroll down here and the arrow is always going to tell you what it's going to return. So this thing is called a text IO wrapper. So it's not just a string, it's some special type of object. And if you scroll down even more, it's going to give you more documentation on it, or you could look up what this is. So what we need to do is put in here whatever we want to open, and we have original.txt, and I could just use the file because it's in the same directory or folder as this program right here. Now that's going to return an object, so we have to assign it somewhere. So what we're going to do is say original file, and a lot of people will give like F or FP or FW or FR, like for file write, file read. Get into the habit of giving good descriptive names because you want to be able to go back and look at your program and be able to read it. And if I just handed this to a friend, it makes it more readable. Like, oh, okay, we're opening up the original file. If you're dealing with it later on, where we're going to have a file that we're copying, which we'll probably call a copy file, that'll be pretty obvious. Okay, we're dealing with the original file, or are we dealing with the copy file? Instead of if you have these short 2-3 letter names or single letter names, someone else you just hand it to and they're looking at the code and they're like, oh, I don't know what that you're doing. So let's put an R, but if you read down here, it actually says that it defaults to R, which means if you didn't spend it in, it's going to assume that you have R. Once you do this, you now have a file object. Whenever you're dealing with files, not only do you open them, but you also have to close them. If you don't close them, then in some cases it will lock the file, especially if you're locking it for a write, then no one else is going to be able to access that file. But in Python, what will happen in your virtual environment is it won't release the memory, and then eventually you could run into issues. Now, this presents a problem because if between when we're opening and we're closing our file, we run into some error, which can happen, especially in Python. Let's say that you have a string and you're trying to convert it to an integer and there's no numbers in the string, then that's going to throw an error. So if you did a conversion while you're reading the lines, it errors out, it's not going to close your file. So to deal with that, instead of doing it this way where we would open a file and close, we use something called a context manager. So to do that, instead we go with open as and then the name. Instead of it being on the left, you put it here with this as keyword, as original file. And then you do like you would do for a if statement or a loop. You do this, and then it's going to go ahead and give you a context, which would be the indentation, and then you deal with the file in that, and then you don't have access to all the operations afterwards. So if we just go ahead and type pass here, and let's go ahead and go print and go original file dot read line, because this is the command to read a line. And you're probably noticing here, I know I'm going really quick, but you could send in an integer and it will read that many characters. If we do this, because this is not indented, it's not within the context, and if we ran this code, we're going to get an error. It's going to say the file is closed. You have to, that's what the context means, and you basically, if you want to read the file, do things with it, you would do it inside the indentation. So now if we run it here, what we're going to get is line 1. And if you remember the file, we have line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, 5, and 6. Now let's go ahead and show you another function called read. If we just, when we hit the dot, by the way, we could see these and we could look up the documentation for open and it'll give us all these commands, or for the type of object that it returns, and see all these and read about them in more detail. So we're going to use this read function, which by the way, you could send it in a certain integer size, or it'll just read the whole thing if you don't specify something. So if we print that out, it's going to give us every single line. Now, let's say we have 6 lines here and we want to read every single line. So we could do that by doing read line, and let's tab this in. This would be a hard-coded solution. We're going to show you how not to do that in a second here. Okay, what doesn't it like? What doesn't it like? Invalid syntax. Did I delete something? There we go. I had an extra blank line. No? All right, so you can get into a situation. Right now we're in the Python program and it didn't exit it for some reason. Because of my indentation, it got confused. You can run the exit command and we'll go back to the prompt. That's probably a really helpful thing to do. I'm sure at some point you're going to screw it up and that's going to happen. I don't know. I think is my indentation that messed that up. Yes. Okay. And we got it fixed. But that's why I was running. Okay. So what if we actually had more than 6 lines? Because this isn't very useful unless we have the exact file that we're talking about. We're trying to print out the 6 lines. How could you do that? Well, similar to what we did in the other tutorials, we can do a for, and then we could say line in original file. And what it will do is read line by line and then put each line into the line here. And then let's go ahead and print out line. And see, we got the same result down here. And of course, if we wanted to print out the individual characters, we could do print character in line and do print char. And now what we're going to see is line 1, line 2, line 4, 3, scrolled too quick, line 5, and line 6. Why did I show you that? I showed you that because these are useful things to know. It's also a part of the solution of how we're going to copy the file. Now, what we actually probably want to do, because what we're trying to do in this one is trying to skip line 5, we need to know which line it is. So instead of just doing line in original file, we can use something different. We're going to declare line num and then do comma here. And instead of just doing in original file, what we're going to use this thing called enumerate. Okay, I'm a coder, not a speller, okay? And if we do that, we're actually going to be able to print out now both the line number, come on, and the line. By the way, if you're wondering how am I filling that in, I am selecting it with the arrows and then I'm hitting the tab key and it'll autofill it. So that's why I can't spell. I use the autofill all the time. All right, so now let us go ahead and print that out. And now we have each line number, but you'll see it starts at 0. Well, it's default, it starts at 0. How do we get it to start as 1? In this enumerate, there's another property in here called startInt. And so we can give it 1. And so now we have line 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means now we can do if line num not equal to 5 and run this, and it's going to skip line 5. Why is this important? Because all we got to do now is put our write code right here, and we're going to copy that. So we kind of accidentally did half the solution. It's almost like I planned this out. Huh? Okay, so now let's talk about actually writing to files, appending them, all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is create a new file in here. I'm going to call this file write.py. I don't know. Weird name. Naming's a hard thing. One of the hardest things about programming. But I want to preserve this code and I want to go over here and start messing. Okay? So first thing I want to show you is with open, and we're going to put in our original file again here. Original.txt. And this time we're going to write. And we're going to go ahead and also say original file once again here with our context. And what we're going to do is go original file dot write, and we're going to write hi, and I'm going to go over to this original text and I'm going to select this all and hit Control C to copy it, and then we're going to hit play. Well, first guess what this is going to do. So okay, I ran it. If you guessed that it's going to put hi at the very end, you're wrong. It actually overrides our whole file. This is the difference between write and append. If we want to actually write to the end of the file hi, we would have to put that back. I hit Control V, by the way, to paste that. See how there's this little circle there, by the way? That means it's not saved, so I have to hit Control S to save it. And if I change this to A for append, now I run it. Now it's going to write it to the end of the file. That is the difference between write and append. Now, since we don't really care about adding on to the end of the file, and it's just fine to start at the beginning of the file, we could just use write mode when we're trying to copy. But now we've just figured out how to actually write to a file. So let's go ahead and delete that. So we have back to the original file, hit Control S because we don't want that circle being there, which means it hasn't been saved. And let's go back to file copy, and let's go ahead and get this done, okay? So what we're gonna do is another with open. And now this is whatever our new, we'll just call it copy text. I'm gonna open that as write, as copied file, or let's say new file, huh? New file, fantastic. And now we need to tab that all in. You can select multiple lines and hit tab and it'll change the tab. Now we have this, all this code. And now remember we are printing it out here. Instead, we want to write to our new file. So what we could do is new file.write. And what are we writing? We're writing the line. And so now if we run this, we're going to look at copy. And you can see copy, we have line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. Whereas line 5, remember we omitted that because that's what we were trying to do. And we finally have line 6. This is how you would read our original file and copy everything but line number 5. If you found this helpful, there's a lot more of these. Look in the description for a playlist of other beginning tutorials. We have a Discord where you can ask questions. Feel free to request things in the comment section or make comments. See you in the next one.